Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this Infosec Edge webcast on intrusion detection and using Zeek and Elastic for incident response. Mark is the author of the Advanced Intrusion Detection Learning Path in Infosec Skills. He's also a graduate of Penn State University and has experience working at a Fortune 500 company as a cybersecurity engineer. He is the founder of Enigma Networks, a SaaS cybersecurity data analytics company helping small to mid-sized organizations protect their environment from cyber threats. He's a member of the Ben Franklin Technology Partners Client Portfolio Program and has been a speaker at Penn State Berks Launchbox events. Thanks for joining us today, Mark.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Before I hand it over to Mark, just a quick overview so everyone knows what to expect on this webinar today. We're going to start off with just an overview of intrusion detection. Mark's going to talk a little bit about how intrusion detection fits into MITRE ATT&CK. And then we're going to spend the bulk of the presentation walking through an intrusion detection demo. Mark will explain the use case. We'll go through a few different tools and hopefully answer any questions that come in during that. And then we'll have some time at the end for a Q&A. So hopefully it'll be a nice, fun, interactive session where everyone can learn a lot here. And then this is our resources page. So again, if you are watching this live, you can open up the related content tab and you should be able to get links to all these. If you're watching it on demand on YouTube or elsewhere, we'll try to put the links in the description. But yeah, just want to call out a few resources here. I guess, Mark, just to tag you in, the first thing here, we have your intrusion detection learning path and some of the blogs that you've written for Infosec resources. Do you want to say anything about your learning path or anything there?
Yeah, sure. No, just the path goes into a little bit more depth of some of the tools, technologies, and the methodologies that we're going to be talking about today and how they can be used with intrusion detection and crafting, meaningful detections to help defend your network, depending on whatever role, whether you're an analyst or an engineer. So.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, and we have our Infosec resources website for anyone who doesn't know. Resources.infosecinstitute.com, where we have a lot of blogs, and Mark's writing blogs for us there. We actually are going to be doing an ebook on intrusion detection using some of the content Mark has created. So not done yet, but hopefully by the end of the month we'll have that live. So if you're on our email list, just check out keep an eye on our newsletters in the coming weeks. And once we get that ready, we'll be sending that out if you want to know more about intrusion detection stuff. And then also just got free resources here. You can create a free Infosec Skills account. We do have paid courses. We have about, 1,500 courses in there, but about 130 of them you can take for free without, putting in a credit card or, signing up for a monthly subscription. So feel free to create a free account. We have, monthly challenges where you can win prizes. We have a Accelerate Scholarship, which I'll talk more about at the end, but definitely encourage anyone on the call to apply to that scholarship. You get lifetime access to Infosec Skills, so, if Mark puts out a course 5 years from now, you'd still get access to that course. So that's pretty cool. So a little bit more information on there coming up at the end of the presentation, but definitely encourage everyone, if you know anyone who's interested in cybersecurity and fits one of the categories, feel free to apply to that scholarship. With that, let's go ahead and jump into the presentation. Once again, if you have any questions that come up, feel free to just drop them right in the Q&A panel. But we'll start with an overview of intrusion detection. So I'll throw it to you, Mark, to kind of set the stage for what the heck is intrusion detection and how it works.
Awesome. Thanks. All right. So yeah, just before we dive too deep into anything, just a quick overview of what intrusion detection is. And it's really just a way to identify, detect unauthorized, potentially malicious activity in your network or on an endpoint in a system. A lot of different definitions, but it really boils down to just being able to really understand what's going on in your network. It's being used by many different roles. So you have SOC analysts, security operations center analysts, tier 1, tier 2 security analysts, threat hunters, as well as network security engineers when they're trying to build detections to really help hone in and identify malicious activity. Also sysadmins as well. Sometimes do a little bit of it, not so much in the security realm.
So I guess I'd just be curious. You talked about different roles there, but is that something, is it a useful skill for like all cybersecurity roles, or is it mainly just for those people that are like kind of more in the SOC, Yeah,
it's a useful skill just for especially just getting into cybersecurity, an entry level role. It's something that I think a lot of professionals, security professionals just in general should learn, because it's kind of the basis of everything. Because it's hard to protect the network if you don't know how to defend it and you don't know how to identify malicious activity. So it's a good role. It's a good starting point for anybody trying to get into security.
Yeah, and so I imagine there's a lot of people on the call like myself. Like, I kind of understand as a concept what intrusion detection is. Like, you're looking for threats, and alerts come up in the SOC center. You get an alert, and you're a junior SOC analyst, and you go to investigate that. But could you just maybe spend a minute talking about like what are the main tasks involved in intrusion detection? Is that mainly it? Or, like, are you using? I know you're going to show us tools, like Zeek and Elastic shortly, but is it a lot of just using tools like that, or using SIEMs and investigating alerts? Like, are there different, like, how would you describe, as like the main tasks of an intrusion detection professional?
Yeah, so a lot of it has to do with first starting off with what tools are at your disposal. What is the company you're working for? What are they using? If anything yet, hopefully they're using something. And a lot of it has to do with first setting up and configuring the tools in the right way. Depending on the use case and what you're trying to do, whether it's an intrusion detection system, which is more signature-based, or like a SIM tool, which is more rule-based detection. So first, it's really, you do a lot of, first, like, why do I want to use this tool? What do I want to detect? Then look at your options for the tool, and then you got to set it up and configure it, which should take some time, because you also don't want to, we'll talk a little bit later on about analyst fatigue and alert fatigue. Because all these tools spit off so much data, so much information, it can sometimes be hard to find what's good and bad. The first step is really picking a tool, setting it up, managing it, and then tuning it to build actual detections that you can use to find malicious activity. So it's a little bit of the engineering side, and then a little bit of the analyst side as well when you're hunting for some of these threats.
Yeah, then one other question I had was on just like kind of the career path. Like, obviously there's some more entry level roles, like a tier 1 SOC analyst, and then, all the way up to, management roles. So just curious, like, how intrusion detection changes. Is there, different tasks as you progress in your career? Someone with 0 years experience versus someone who's been doing it 10 years. Like, is there going to be different things that you're doing as you progress?
Yeah, absolutely. And essentially how a lot of people start is they'll start by doing a tier 1, like a monitoring role. So that'll be essentially you and a team, whether it might be in a SOC or depending on what your organization is calling it, especially analysts that are just monitoring the output of some of these tools. So that's kind of like really an alert comes in either through a mailbox or you log into the console of the tool itself, and you'll be investigating alerts and trying to find specific things. Then typically after you do that a little bit for 6 months to a year, you're kind of like, you're familiar with it. Then you might be implementing new tools. You might be implementing new detection tools, or at least more advanced detection tools that you can kind of build off of some of that tier 1 monitoring, move into more tier 3, and then eventually move into hunting, which is essentially looking for threats before you even have some detections, but using some detections in place to find some of that, and then all the way up to management. A lot of the great, I've worked with a lot of really great managers, and they all started off, and they're all very technical, and they all started off with detection and learning how to do all this stuff themselves. So no matter what role you want to progress into, having some technical skills in this detection side of things is going to help you in your career path.
All right, yeah, let's move on to the next slide here, the intrusion detection overview. So yeah, I found this interesting, these kind of 3 different buckets of types of intrusion detection. You want to explain each one a little bit there?
Yeah. So essentially there's multiple different types of intrusion detection. You'll probably get different names all over the place for different things, but it kind of boils down to signature-based, which is kind of what a lot of the intrusion detection systems like Suricata or Cisco Firepower and IDS, where it's like it's detecting something based off of a known bad IOC. And typically how that works is a huge one is Snort. A lot of IDS are built off of Snort. Moving on to the rule-based detection ones, those are built using a set of rules, kind of like a SIM tool. So essentially you might have a signature-based, like an IDS, like a Snort IDS, might be one of the 15 feeds or 50 feeds you throw into a SIM tool and build rules that correlate across different data sets. And that helps you determine like specific activity depending on what you're trying to do. And then anomaly detection is a little more advanced. It uses some machine learning to detect previously unknown threats. It's something that there's many different branches of anomaly detection. So it scopes from like protocol analysis to different user behavior analytics. So there's a lot of different categories there, but in a broad sense, it breaks down to the signature, which is like an IDS, rule-based, which is like using a SIM tool with multiple different log sources, multiple different data analytics sources, and then anomaly-based, which is more algorithmic, more machine learning, a little more advanced.
Yeah, and do you have any examples of like what these types of rules would be? You know, like what is it if you were someone setting up this system? Like what are the types of things that you'd be looking for to like generate an alert?
Yeah. So when you're trying to generate an alert, and you're using some of these tools, essentially the first step is getting the data into the tool. So at a signature-based level for this, what we're talking about here, I'm going to use a tool like Suricata, open source IDS. I'm going to deploy a sensor on my network, and then that's going to monitor some of the traffic. It's going to spit that out into the console, and it's going to if there's a pattern match, it's going to create an alert. For a rule-based detection, like we're going to see a little bit in Elastic, that's going to take data sets that could be, again, from Snort, or it could be from your Windows servers or from your firewall logs, could be from your CASB or server. And that's going to correlate across all pretty much any data element that you want to build a rule for the use case. If you're trying to find something that's data exfiltration, you're going to utilize some of the you can utilize if you have some proxy logs, different things, or if you have a CASB in place. And then the anomaly detection is really depending on use cases, and a lot of that has to do with network data. So that might be, we're going to talk a little bit about Zeek and Zeek logs, and we're going to talk about how you can utilize that and just regular detections, but it's a great use case for anomaly detections and ML because there's typically so much data being produced by network activity. So yeah, it's very broad, but there's a lot of different methodologies.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we get into the demo, we do have one more slide here on the MITRE ATT&CK and intrusion detection. I know, like, I find this MITRE ATT&CK website really useful. If you haven't ever been I don't know the exact URL, but if you just Google MITRE ATT&CK, it's pretty interesting. You can see, all the different tactics and techniques that are really outlined that cyber criminals or malicious actors use. So can you talk a little bit about how intrusion detection fits into this MITRE ATT&CK framework?
Sure. Yeah. So essentially, MITRE is an awesome framework. It's pretty much just a knowledge base that's based off of adversary like tactics, techniques, based on like real world scenarios. So essentially what we're looking at here breaks down into the tactics and the techniques. So the tactics are pretty much the why of the technique, like the why is the threat actor doing this. What is his goal? What is he trying to achieve? And then the techniques, which is what we're seeing below, is all the how can they do this? How can the adversary gain different types of leverage into the network? And there's many different techniques. So I think there's around 180 techniques here, and then there's like 370 or so sub techniques, which aren't even shown yet, which is what you dive into. But essentially, it's a great framework for when you're trying to build detections. How can you craft stuff? How can you build your logic to start with reconnaissance and kind of exfiltration, and how can moving across laterally in a network and building your rules to match that. So. Yeah, it's an awesome framework.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think most people on the call, they want to see the demo. But before we jump in, we do have a poll question here. So I would love if everyone could just answer. Let Mark know if you have experience in any of these tools. He's going to talk a little bit about Zeek and Brim and Elastic. And I think it would be helpful for him just to know if most people on the call are starting with absolutely zero knowledge, if maybe it's your first time ever even hearing those words, or if it's something that you have experience with already. So we'll give everybody a minute to answer. But while they're answering, Mark, are there different categories or types of tools? I mean, I know you're going to show these three here today and talk a little bit about them, but I mean, like, how wide is the sort of tool set for intrusion detection, or like, how do you view it? Do you sort of view it as different categories, or anything you want to talk about there?
Yeah, I would say that there's definitely multiple different categories. What we're going to dive into is using the Elastic SIM. We're going to dive into, kind of get into the use case. We're going to use some Zeek logs and a tool called Brim. So there's Zeek, which is a network monitoring tool, and it produces really good network data, and it's got like over 50 log output files. And then we're going to explore some of that in the Elastic Stack, which is more of a traditional SIM rule-based detection where it would use like the log files like Zeek and however many data sets your organization has dumped into it. So there's numerous different tools, numerous different categories that it breaks down into, but we're going to cover just only a couple today.
Yeah. And do you have like a favorite tool, like your go-to tool that you use all the time for intrusion detection?
Yeah, I'm particularly a fan of SIM tools, Splunk, Elastic, Logarithm. I've used pretty much every SIM tool under the sun. Some easier to work with than others, some harder, but that's kind of one of my platforms because you can really aggregate everything and get a holistic picture. And you're very, depending on what you want to do and how you want to build your detections, you can kind of take it whichever way you want, which to me, once you've built a base of a framework and you know what you're kind of doing, it's kind of like free range for you to kind of build what you want to build content-wise. So that's kind of my favorite tools to use.
All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the results. I did forget to put none in here. So there's, some people might not have selected anything, but it looks like people have the most experience with SIM tools and then tools like Zeek and then Brim. So if that helps with the demo here.
Yeah.
But yeah, now, let's go ahead and let's transition to, I think, probably at least what I find the most exciting part of these, webinars is actually, learning something and seeing stuff in action. Do you want to, set the stage about what we're going to see here before we actually start your screen share and jump into everything?
So essentially what we're going to look is a couple different tools, how to use it. I've already loaded some data into them, but I'll talk about how you can load data into them. I wanted to show a tool called Brim, which some people today are familiar with, but I couldn't figure out. We can't, the screen share isn't per se working. So we have something I can kind of show screenshots of that, of what I did, and we can kind of speak to it. But essentially, I want to show how we're going to take a pcap file, turn it into Zeek logs, load that into Elastic for some analysis, and I'll walk through a couple of dashboards. I'll walk through the data sets, and then at the end, I'll also walk through a little bit of setting up, the different rules that you have in the Elastic SIM tool, how to use them, and how they map back to the MITRE framework over time. So that's essentially what we're going to be exploring a bit today.
All right. Well, yeah, if you want to start sharing your screen, we can walk through that. And just a reminder for everyone on the call here, feel free to drop, questions in, whether it's about the specific demo or these specific tools or just general career questions about working in incident response or, anything that's on your mind. I'll try to serve up as many to mark as we can, throughout the demo here. And then if there's time at the end, we'll save time to answer as many of the other ones as we can.
Cool. Yeah. So I just want to give a little bit of better background. Essentially, I like to start some of this, demo and use cases with just a scenario. For this, I would pick, you're a security analyst. You're tasked with investigating some security abnormal activity coming from a company workstation. Many tools at your disposal, but you've been introduced to Zeek and the benefits of its rich log output. So we're going to learn how to work with that data, learn how to read the output, learn how to read the different files, and explore a little bit in a SIM tool and explore some of the analytics. So we're going to start by where did I first collect some of this pcap data, which some of you guys might be familiar with. It's called malware traffic analysis net. Overview of how to load it into Brim, which is going to turn the pcap into some of the Zeek log files. And then we're going to quickly kind of dive into the Elastic toolkit, then review some of the data and discover, look at an alert, look at a dashboard, and then look at how to create rules and detections in Elastic. So without further ado, I'll kind of dive into this site, which is kind of want to give again a quick overview of some things depending on what people have seen. But this is an awesome site. If you ever just want to do some practice traffic analysis, for this one I took a pcap file, and we're going to essentially we downloaded that, and I have links to some of this as well. So after the webinar, if you want to do something similar or follow along, happy to send that over. But essentially, this site is great because it shows different trainings and different things for how you can do some network analysis, which is great for what we're talking about today, which is intrusion detection. So for this use case, I took a pcap file from this and turned it into Zeek logs. And essentially, I wanted to show a little bit just quickly of Brim. This is the Brim tool that I was mentioning. It's a great tool. Has a lot of different analytics capabilities of it. Essentially, if you've never used it before, you can download it. I think they have versions for Windows, for Macs, for Linux. I'm on a MacBook, so that's what I used. Wanted to show a little bit about the output and play around with the tool, but I really couldn't get it working on the screencast. So took some screenshots of what it would look like. So once you download your pcap file, if you were to do this on your own, you could upload it when you downloaded Brim. Essentially, all you're doing is once you load the application, you're just dragging and dropping the pcap file into here, and then that will literally transform that into Zeek logs. So what we're looking at over here is the output of that packet capture that Brim transferred into log files. And there's some pretty neat things you can do with the tool. Again, I can't interact with this here on this screenshot, but there's a lot of different neat things that's already baked into the tool that you can use some general analytics from. You can't really build alerting or detections from it, but it's a good kind of starting place, and it's a good way to if you just want to analyze a log file quickly. So what we did and what
I got a question for you real quick, Mark. Yeah. So I think like people like myself, I know like a pcap is like network, packet capture stuff. And then these are log files, but could you explain a little bit the difference between like a pcap and a log file and why you have to take this step to convert it?
Yeah. So essentially, if you were to use Zeek in an actual production environment, you'd install a sensor. It would be collecting data from a tap, or it would be translating that, and then it would translate it and output it to log files. So for this, essentially what we wanted to do is I wanted to show that without having a live Zeek sensor in place and installed. For this, what I did, I took a packet capture, which is just network data, tons of traffic and tons of payload, and I wanted to run that through Zeek. This tool over here, which is Brim, which allows you to translate that into log files, which kind of also the good thing about Zeek is there's like over 50 file formats. So if you're utilizing it, you don't have to have all the information that a pcap would contain. You could just kind of collect what you want to, which as you're seeing over here, like the capture and the stats, the files, the HTTP, and the alert and the con. These are Zeek files formats. So essentially, you can choose, if you were to do this in a live environment, you could choose which of these you want to collect and ship to your SIM tool, which is good. So you don't have to, like a pcap is just so much data, tons of data, whereas this you can kind of put it in a log format and ship just what you want for either analytics or your detection use cases.
Yeah, and then we have one question that just came in from Kevin. He's wondering if we're looking at Zeek or Brim right now. So I believe we're looking at a screenshot of Brim, correct?
Yeah, this is a screenshot of Brim, and the data in here is Zeek data. So Brim turned the pcap file into Zeek logs. But the actual tool that we're looking at is the Brim interface.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. And again, it's a pretty neat tool, so I definitely recommend if you haven't played around with it, play around with it. It's free to utilize. Takes lots of different captures and inputs and turns it into stuff that you can really kind of play around with, and it's just fun to see what your data looks like and whatnot. Now, what I did for this was, if you look up here at the export button, you can export it into JSON or CSV format. I exported this into a CSV format because I wanted to upload it into Elastic Cloud to kind of play around with further and look at how I can explore the data and then build meaningful detections. So any other questions before we move on to Elastic? If not, I can just dive into the elk.
No, I think you can move on.
Okay. Awesome. So this is Elastic. I think a lot of people said they had some experience with it, but just wanted to give a quick overview for those who did not haven't used it yet. Really awesome product, really robust ecosystem. So it's open source. For this, what I'm going to show today, I utilized their cloud trials. So I think you get a 14-day free trial to play around with, poke around in the system. I definitely recommend that because it kind of can give you a pretty good overview of the tool itself, whether so there's three parts. There's Kibana, which is the UI, the user interface, which we'll look at in a second. There's Elasticsearch, which is the data store. And then there's also integration layers like Logstash and Beats to help you ship and parse the data that you're going to be sending to this tool. But this is the link to the web page. And again, I think you get a 14-day free trial when you sign up. So moving on, this is my instance. So I'm in the Elastic Cloud now, and this is my deployment after I signed up for everything. And it's really interesting because it kind of shows you exactly what the health of your system is, what your instance level is, and what all this means is essentially, is your instance healthy? Is it running? And being in the cloud version, they kind of do a lot of this for you. So it's pretty simple to set up and get up and running, rather than you having to set up a Docker container with Elk stand up in it or hosting it on AWS yourself. It's a pretty good way to get up and running. I just wanted to show a little bit of the console management and deployment management. And if there's no questions here, I'll move on. I think for the cloud, if you were to do this, you have options for Google Cloud, AWS, and Azure. So depending on what you would want to use.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have any current questions coming in, so I think we're good for now.
Cool. All right, so now if you click into your actual instance, you're in the actual Elastic instance, and there's a ton of stuff here. A lot of really interesting features. But this is essentially, you have your analytics. I'll go over the menu bar if people haven't used it before. You have your analytics, which is your dashboards, maps, machine learning functionality, enterprise search, observability, and then security, which is where we're going to spend some time in today. And the dev management tools as well, which is helping you, where you can kind of go to manage your stack as well as ship data to it. So for the purpose of this, what I did was I dumped, took the CSV file from Brim that we just found and uploaded it here. So you can, there's many ways to ship your data to a SIM tool like this. You can utilize, again, Elastic has the Beats framework, which are lightweight software agents that ship data, whether it's a Windows log server or a Palo Alto firewall, any security tool, you name it, they probably have an integration for it. And in a live environment, what you would do is configure those agents, and they have a new one called the Elastic Agent, which they're coining now to ship data to your stack. But for the purpose of this, I just essentially drag and drop this here. It does a lot of the parsing for you, and so you can kind of see it in Discover, which is over here. After you do that, it populates it with an index. And so I have a couple of different data sets in here, but this is the one. Another way of looking at the data that we just saw in Brim in that screenshot. This is essentially the same exact data, but just parsed out in Elastic. So in my Elastic SIM tool, so I can utilize it to kind of craft detections, explore it, and really just understand better what the data is and how I can use it. So before I dive into, what some of this stuff means, what the parsing out was, any questions on any of this stuff at all?
Oh, I just had a question on the types of data, for the newbies like myself who've never used a tool like this. I imagine there's just a huge amount of potential data that you could put in there. So I was wondering if you could, I'm sure you'll talk about some of the use cases, but is this mainly like this network traffic data that's coming in and out? Or are you pulling data from other sources? Like what are like the typical types of data that you'd be like integrating into this?
Yeah, so for typical data, this example would be like network data. Zeek could be reducing some network logs for you. But essentially, as a security professional, you'd be ingesting security tool data as well. So whether that be from your CrowdStrikes or your EDRs, it'd be from your firewalls, your DLP systems, depending on how much your company is willing to spend on hosting or data storage and retention. You'd be having a lot of different data sets. You're going to have your Active Directory logs in here. You're going to have your just different system logs in here. It's a lot of different variables. Network data is an extremely important one. So whether you're using a tool like Zeek and kind of shipping that data in there, or whether you're just collecting firewall data, network data is a huge one. But it is also very robust. So you're going to have a lot of different sets in there.
Yeah, we have one question that came in. He's asking if I have Splunk in an environment, is there a way to integrate with cloud-based IDS environment?
Yeah. So essentially, there's a lot of different intrusion detections. So it also depends, I guess, on if you're using a commercial or an open source IDS. The answer is yes for both of it, depending on how sophisticated you want the integration to be. If you're using a commercial IDS, you probably have to work with the vendor. I'm sure they probably have an integration to Splunk. I'm sure they do. If you're using like an open source, like a Snort or a Suricata, that probably would be. They probably have an integration as well, but you could also have it you have your output files sitting on a box, and use like something like Elastic Agent or Fluent Bit or Fluent D, which is another integration shipper to kind of ship that to Splunk. So yeah, there's definitely options for that.
Yeah, and then Kimberly's asking, can it be utilized over Azure? So I'm assuming she's asking if you can use this Elastic tool with data from Azure, maybe, if I'm understanding correctly.
Can you use as Elastic with Azure logs? Is that?
Yeah, that could be. If you want to follow up, Kimberly, if I got your question wrong, feel free to drop it in. But yeah, I believe that's what she's asking.
Oh yeah. So Elastic does have some integrations. That might be something good to show. Let me see. Let me show that quickly here.
Yeah, she said, data pull from Azure logs.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So here's something where it has a list of all the Elastic integrations or integrations, and they have a ton. So absolutely, it does. It's depending on the environment and how it's set up. Whatever your cloud, like pulling from cloud can be a little bit tricky because you got to get the right credentials and the right access. But yeah, you can absolutely pull pretty much whatever you want. Now the one thing is, once you do pull, you probably want to tune it because it'll probably just the way it's set up, it'll ship everything, and you probably just want to see specific access events, or you might want to parse the log file so you don't get stuff that you don't want to take up space that you're not using. But yeah, you can ship a lot of different stuff with this. And mostly some tools.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Cool. So I'll talk a little bit more about the data that we're seeing here. Essentially, when it parses out the log files, we're seeing, and you can kind of, I'll dive into the dashboard in a little bit better because you can kind of get a better representation of this data here by just looking at the logs. But this is parsing out the different log types. And essentially over here, this is parsed out under path. So when you're using like Zeek network log data, the con log is like pretty much every connection that's going back and forth in a network. And then the files is anything that's related to a file activity, DNS traffic logs, and Kerberos, SSL, and so forth and such. And actually it might be helpful if, before we dive into the dashboard, just to kind of give an overview of like what we're seeing here. Is essentially, if we go here, this is the Zeek log record file. And like we just saw some con logs. We saw some, I think there's some HTTP as well as some Kerberos logs. When Zeek creates data, it puts it into these log files. And this is what I'm saying is, when you actually want to ship this data for analytics and detections to an actual SIM tool in real time, you might want to maybe you collect all of this, or you might want to collect just the log files for your use case. I'd always recommend collecting con, because that's just giving you basic statistics on the connections. But maybe there might be a use case where you only want to ship like con and FTP or files or DNS logs, not everything. It does a great job at parsing out the data, but it is a lot of data, and it could get expensive for storage. But so essentially, what we're looking at here is Zeek log files shipped to Elastic for analytics, and then the path we're using here is the type of file or the type of log file that's Zeek parsed the information into. So if there's nothing, that's a little overview. Probably don't want to bore you guys with looking at the data anymore. So let me go into a dashboard that I created in Kibana to kind of show a little bit of how this activity broke down. So the log file, first, I always like to start with like the count of the records. So how much data are we collecting and pulling in from this packet capture, and that the pcap turned to Zeek logs, shipped to this SIM tool. How many records total are we looking at here? I'm not going to help you quickly identify stuff. And then breaking down that traffic by alerts. Sometimes depending on what data you're shipping to Zeek, it'll actually put it's a category called like alerts. So, and that utilizes a Suricata IDS plugin, so it can actually take some of the network traffic and parse it into specific alerts that match IOCs, which is really, really interesting and a great place to start. And this goes into what we were just talking about like a few seconds ago, like the con file, so the log types breaking down. So it's good to see, out of all of your records, what is the traffic, what is the protocols, what types of data are you looking at here? We did have some DNS data in here, so I like to look at, okay, so what's the answers? Like, what's the query and what's the answer? Is there anything abnormal? Are there any suspicious DNS answers, in your data sets? And then service breakdown. So this is also very similar. It's like, okay, what services are being used the most, or what are we seeing in this traffic pool that we're looking at? Whether it's SSL, SMB, HTTP, and then some top file paths to kind of show like where someone's activity is and sitting from. But this is a basic dashboard. It's kind of wanted to show that like in tools like Elastic and pretty much every other SIEM, you can build different dashboards for different data sets. As a detection engineer, this is going to be a good starting point. Whether you're a SOC analyst or a detection engineer, threat hunters, it's just great to see different spikes and see, using this as a starting point to drill down into your data and really investigate and or start hunting for bad activity. I'll stop there for any questions.
Yeah. I was just going to ask if that's, it sounds like this is where you generally would start. And then I guess I'm curious, like what are the typical things that you'd be looking for then, like on the dashboard, like you mentioned with DNS, like how would you just have to know like which DNS is, bad that you should be looking into, or is there, particular use cases that are most common that you would identify on this dashboard to drill into?
Yeah. So for this, there's a couple of different things. I mean, for the data that we use for this sample, this test, this little demo, in this log file, it has some DNS. But if you were, first I'd start with building your dashboards, making it like a count of, okay, what are we looking at? What's the breakdown of the alerts? If there's any, what's the breakdown of traffic? And then one being DNS here. So for DNS specifically, what I'll be looking for, we don't have it here, but sometimes we can even get like bytes. So, is there a huge spike in bytes and activity of your DNS traffic? That's abnormal. Or if it's like a DNS, are you seeing, an abnormal, typically maybe this is new, maybe you're baselining, maybe you see this all the time, but all of a sudden you see like a new answer that's like .ru or something like that. Well, that's a little suspicious. Like, why is that there? You can even bake one other integration, which we didn't talk about, is like a threat feed source. So you could even bake a threat feed source into your SIEM tool and correlate it with this data to say, hey, if this matches up, this IOC matches up with a known bad IOC, and build a dashboard of just that. So it's really specific to the dashboards can be specific to whatever your use case is. For this one being, using Zeek logs with the con and the DNS data, like what can we build that's meaningful? But essentially, always recommend a dashboard being something that's, you can change over time, but something that makes sense to you, and not making it overly complicated.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Cool. All right. And then finally, I do want to talk a little bit about utilizing this tool for rules and detections and alerts. So under the security module, go to the overview quickly. I haven't used this before. But I don't have any real-time data coming in here, so this is not a actual deployment. But just kind of want to go over the actual different parts of this and how you'd utilize it. Many different tools, and some of it can be actually a little bit overwhelming because there's a lot of it thrown at your face. But once you get used to it, it's kind of you kind of get the hang of it. But essentially, there's like a whole thing on rules. And what I did was when you first come in here, Elastic has about 365 rules or detections that we can utilize, and kind of depending on what data we have shipped in here into Elastic, you might maybe only be able to use 50 of them, depending on what you have. But maybe you might be able to use all of them if you have a really robust logging system. But essentially, before you set up alerts, you're going to set up rules, which are essentially just logging, or essentially just ways to build logic and detections into your workflows. So if we can, we'll dive into one, take a look at them. The way they broke it out is really awesome. And again, these are preloaded ones. You can build a ton of custom ones yourself if you don't see one here. So it's not like you're locked in a specific detection. Anyway, diving into some of them, they have what they are. They have a little bit about why they're here. They have the query, which is essentially like the logic that you would utilize to build this rule. So you could even say you like this rule, you can use this as a starting point and add on to it if you'd like. If it doesn't meet your needs or whatnot. but they also have some of the stuff that they have can be linked to different MITRE frameworks and say, okay, like here's why we're going to utilize this, and here's the tactic, or this is used to detect this technique, and there's a lot of different ways you can utilize these rules and these alerts. So pretty robust, a lot of different things you can do with it. And here's one here that I have it linked to like a specific MITRE framework, which is awesome. And this is great for if you're a detection engineer trying to build and code logic into your SIM tool. But this is a lot. I mean, this interface. Any questions on the interface or what this does and how to utilize it?
Yeah, well, I was just wondering if you could maybe pick kind of one rule, whether it's just one on the screen or another one that you like, and just kind of maybe explain in detail like what the rule is doing and how it's how it works, I guess.
Yeah, we can just start with this one since it's up and running. Essentially, I'll talk about the data that it's utilizing. Why, for first, the about, which is awesome. This is right here, to identify hidden network shares. Now, to do this rule, you will need that this is the index patterns are what we were just looking at over here. So essentially, when you let me go back into Discover, here is essentially your index. So when you upload a new data set, you have to create a new index for it. Sometimes it automatically, if you have a beach agent, it automatically does that for you, but you probably still have to do some configuration. So when we're looking at these rules here, and they're saying, okay, they're pulling this from logs endpoint, you got to have a winlog beat index set up here. If you don't have that, the rule is not going to fire, and it's not going to work. So this is pulling from your Windows logs. And then the query over here is essentially telling us like when processes stopped and started. You can even add thresholds to this as well, which these guys have, and scanning periods. So after the logic is coded out of when this would be kind of utilized, so this would be using, again, your winlog beat data, which is a combination of your Windows event security logs and PowerShell logs to create this detection. You can use their thresholds where it runs every 5 minutes, or you could have it run every 1 minute or 10 minutes, 1 hour, once a day, depending on what you want the alert to run. And it look back on the data to scan it. But yeah, so essentially that's kind of how it's set up, and it's really important. Like again, it kind of goes back to what I think I mentioned in the beginning of this, is really being clear on like what data you have, like what's the use cases, because you're going to have to get your data first before you can build any good detections. Like you have to get your data into the tool. It has to be parsed. It has to be normalized, and then you can build the detections of something like this. Because if it's not, you could have a ton of data in here, but if it's not parsed, and it's not in the right index, for example, some of these rules would be kind of useless. So, mm-hmm.
We have a question. Someone's wondering if you can integrate any open source threat intelligence into Elastic here.
Yeah, they do, and they actually have. Let me see if I can go back to that integration page. They do have, so they have Alien Vault, Anomaly. They have also MISP, which is really interesting. Pretty cool platform to get up and running. It takes different data feeds and can utilize for threat intel. So yeah, they have a couple out of the box ones like these, but you can also leverage their FileBeat agent for pretty much if you're using like, I'm sure they have a FireEye API or any kind of API for different more vendor-specific tools. But yeah, they do have a lot of options for that. Yeah.
And then we have one more question. Someone's asking if there's any hands-on certification exam, or training that includes, performing a task with these tools like you're doing now, or, anything you recommend there. I'm not sure if you're familiar with any specific exams that cover this or ways to validate your learning with this.
Yeah, there's some. I know Elastic has some of their own training, depending on if you have depending on if your organization can fund some of that. But also a great way, like how I learned to do a lot of this was there's also a lot of really interesting security researchers and even like YouTube's channels that have demos where you can hey, I used this data set, uploaded it here, and followed along. And it's a great way to learn. And it's also, a cheaper way to learn. but then, there are Elastic certifications you can get for doing stuff like this. But I guess it also depends on if you want a more like SIM agnostic training or an Elastic training. But yeah, there's lots of different options. But for the SIM agnostic, there's a lot of different YouTube channels, a lot of different security blogs where they walk you through how to set up specific like FileBeat agents to ship data sets, to send to Elastic, to review a use case, which is pretty interesting. And it's typically free. The only cost is hosting and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot out there.
Yeah, and in your advanced intrusion detection courses, are you covering specific tools and use cases like this, or is it more, like theory stuff? Like, I'm just curious how hands-on it is for folks who want to, really build that hands-on experience.
Yeah, some of it is, the first part of it's theory, then we dive into some of these tools. We have a couple of different labs to utilize for SIM detections, and then we also have a little bit of I go into a little bit more depth of the kind of anomaly detection. We don't actually do a hands-on lab because it's more, again, algorithmic. So we have a few different options in that course as well.
Yeah, and then one other question I'm wondering about template logs. Like, are there template logs available that they could use, to practice while on this trial period? And I know you showed that malware traffic website. I don't know if that's your go-to source. Well,
yeah, there's so many. I can send a follow up with a link to, it's like a bunch of GitHub repositories that have all kinds of different logs for actually this data for different security use cases. So that the traffic analysis site was really good one to collect some data, but there's so many others. And then Elastic also does have, it's not so much security related, but some of it could be example weblog. So if you don't even want to go to an external site and you just want to play around with a tool like this, for example, they do have some logs and some data for you to kind of at least test the tool out with before, to see if you like it, before you see if you want to utilize this SIM tool or this tool as a way to dump security data in it to play around. So a lot of different sources.
Yeah, and then the last question we have from now, someone's asking, they said, am I understanding this correctly? Both Zeek and Elastic are open source, which means we not only have the ability to monitor what shows up in the dashboard, we can also programmatically remove anything not pertinent to what we are looking for, meaning we can hone this to see only what we need, all garbage removed, question mark. Yep. So that's what they're asking.
Yep. Yeah, now Zeek, Zeek is if for what we're talking about here, I'd utilize Zeek as a way to ship it's a way to produce the log data that you would use to ship here. You can even do some of the filtering, like we talked a little bit before you even ship this to your SIM. So you might not have to do a lot of the tuning in the SIM. Now the Elastic is open source. What we have right here is their cloud SIM. You can download a local copy or have a box running with Elastic as well, where you have free range to the code and you can do pretty much anything you want to do with it as far as tuning and building detections. So like it's like I said, a lot of the work up front and what you're going to be doing is crafting the data, preparing the data, sanitizing it, normalizing it, parsing it, and getting it ready to build detections. And once you build your detections, you might be like, okay, this is a lot of false positives, so let's filter out X, Y, and Z log type. But yeah, you can do all of that with Elastic or majority of SIM tools out there.
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. So that was the gist of what I wanted to at least dig into and dive into today. So let me stop sharing.
We can go on to the next slide here. It's really our last slide before any final questions. So, anything in particular you wanted to speak to on this slide, Mark?
Yeah, so I guess the big thing is, so say now that you've set up your tools, you have some data coming in, you've built a couple of detections, what do you do next? A big part of this is, as I mentioned, tuning. You don't just want to have a bunch of alerts firing and oh my God, we got to look at all this stuff. You want good quality detections. That you're never going to have. There's always going to be false positive, but how can you minimize those? So you have less alert fatigue, which is huge in the industry because you have a lot of SOCs, a lot of just analysts looking at logs, looking at different dashboards. Some people are using 3 SIM tools and doing an IDS, and it's hard to get that single pane of glass. But you don't want to get, you can get burnt out really quick. So a big part of what I would like to reiterate is just, it's a starting point and it's something that you're going to build over time. And, your detections are only, the more you tune, the more you understand your data and what you have coming in, the better your detections are going to be. And how do you choose a tool? Well, there's so many different types of tools, but I think choosing tools based off of use cases and, what resources you have at your disposal, whether it's, do you have the funds for an enterprise tool or do you have to build something open source? Open source tools are also a great way to learn just, relationships because the relationship between an open source tool and a lot of the enterprise tools are very similar. So it's a great way to kind of train and kind of learn a new tool or new technology. So.
Yeah, I wonder if you could talk more about that sort of alert fatigue, because that's something I've been hearing about for a decade. I think maybe I could be wrong. It might even, I think it was the Target breach, and I'm not 100% positive on this, so don't quote me. But I believe that breach, there actually was an alert and that got missed, or one of those big breaches from 2012, 2013. So that was when alert fatigue and the problem of alerts. There's a lot of articles that came out about it, and it's a decade later. There's still all this discussion about alert fatigue. So, do you feel like there's been progress made, in the last couple of years, along that lines, or just any? How are people tackling that issue?
I feel like there has been progress, but then I also feel like there's so many new tools that we might have solved the alert fatigue, but now it's oh wait, now we're going to dump 10 new tools into our data, so now we have 50 more thousand alerts to look at. So I definitely think tools have there's been a lot of good advances in technology and as far as helping that, but at the same point, I think this is where ML can kind of come into the picture to kind of help weed out some of the tier one, kind of help some of those analysts so they're not as fatigued. And those tools are just starting to get into the industry. There's cool tools like Darktrace that has a network IDS, kind of essentially a network IDS. That's a machine learning tool that tries to do some of that. There's a lot of different technologies there. But yeah, it's as security industry grows and there's more tool sets, it's kind of, it's hard because you do have some stuff that solves that, but then you have more tools that are aiding to that. So it's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, I did notice along lines of machine learning in the demo that there was an option in the menu for Elastic for machine learning. So is it possible to set up machine learning rules within Elastic?
It is. Yeah, there's now the thing with Elastic and the ML, I will say depending on how deep you are in programmatically and into it. You can't really see the logic behind it. It's, if you're looking for a specific algorithm, you might not find that. It's kind of hey, I have an anomaly detection algorithm to do time series on my network data. And it might give you the results, but you're not really going to see under the hood what's going on. But yeah. So there are options there. There's a great way. I would say if you're completely new to ML, it's a great way to experiment with it, great way to learn about it, and great way to learn how typically the output of it is. It's a record with an anomaly score. So it'd be from 1 to 10 or something. I think they might do 50 to 100. And, 90 is more anomalous, 20, not so much. Well, you can't see the underlying algorithms that they use to kind of build that. So it's a great tool to explore. Yeah.
And then we have a question from Kimberly. She wants to know if the data reports integrate well with PowerPoint for presentations. Have you ever used that with PowerPoint?
So yeah, I guess so. I guess exporting data from Elastic, essentially. That's the question.
Yeah, I think at some point you want to present it right to whatever stakeholders, and it sounds like she uses PowerPoint. But yeah, do you have any general advice on how to then present the data to those stakeholders?
Yeah, typically what I've used, and I've used a lot of different SIM tools. I notice a lot of reports tend to be very tactical, and I guess a lot of stakeholders just want the business talk. So what I've done is I've got a report that said my top detections, what rules filed, how many high criticals, lows, and depending on the data source, is this coming from, is it network data, where even these threats are coming from, and then I would put that in a Excel spreadsheet where I had more flexibility. And then I put it into a PowerPoint. So depending on who your target audience is, the reports might be too technical. But if it's a technical audience, you should be good. But I typically have the data, then I'll put it in an Excel spreadsheet or something like Microsoft Power BI, and then show that to a stakeholder.
All right. Yeah, that's the last of the questions here. Yeah, I guess just one thing to summarize, for folks on the call who are looking to get into intrusion detection and maybe they're new, don't know where to start. I mean, obviously you have your courses. That's probably a great place to start. But yeah, any other just advice for someone who, they want to start doing something tonight or this weekend, to kind of move into an intrusion detection career?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess as far as advice, depending on where you're at in your career and where you're at, I think first, downloading some of this, utilizing whatever open source technology you can, and to build some of these tools, and also doing labs like we do here. So Infosec is a great way to just learn. And there's so many online resources as well, free, that you can just look up articles and kind of get into it. But as far as on the actual job, I think, a lot of it's going to depend on what your company is using already and what you have, I guess, free range to do and not do. But for me, I say set up a home lab. It doesn't have to be a big home lab. Start with a couple tools that maybe it's Zeek, or maybe it's Elastic, maybe it's a cert called IDS, which we didn't talk about today, but another awesome open source tool. And just start playing around with it and see how these things talk. And then, maybe you build out your environment to have a couple of Windows servers, and how can you ship data there? So, a lot of different options to get started. And I think a great way is to do hands-on stuff and not just read about it, but actually, build something and learn. Yeah,
perfect. We run out of time here, so we need to wrap up and announce our winner for Infosec Skills. But before we do that, I did just want to call out our Infosec Accelerate scholarships. As you can see here on the screen, they are open through July 31st, 2020, and that gives you lifetime access to Infosec Skills. So that's pretty awesome, in my opinion. Lifetime of learning. You can keep training with these different courses and labs for the next 30 years, or I guess however long your life is. So there's 5 different categories, and encourage you to share this. The link should be in the related content tab, or also we'll put it, if you're watching this on YouTube, in the description. Definitely encourage you to apply. We've only been doing this for a couple of years now, so it's a great value, but it's not one of those scholarships that's hugely known where we're getting, thousands of people applying or anything. So I think, potentially have a pretty good shot of being selected, if you're a good applicant. So yeah, for sure, check that out, and let everyone that is interested know, share it with your friends, family, coworkers, whoever. And then last, we talked a little bit today about Infosec Skills. If you have no idea what that is, it's basically our on-demand training platform. We have 190 different role-based learning paths, one of those being Mark's advanced intrusion detection, but we also have, ethical hacking, digital forensics. We have certification learning paths like Security Plus, CISSP, all of those things. And then, they're accompanied with these hands-on labs and cloud-hosted cyber ranges, so you can actually get some of that experience. And then we do have live boot camps as well. If you're one of those folks who, wants to do that kind of 5-day exam cram model where, you get the 40 hours, over the course of a week with an instructor to learn all about the Security Plus. That's a great option as well. And that comes with an exam pass guarantee. So you can find more information about all this, infosecinstitute.com/skills. But the winner who is going to get a year Infosec Skills subscription, let me just find it quick, is Shantia from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So Shantia, keep an eye on your email. We will be sending you some information with a code for you to subscribe for your free year. But also, everyone else should be aware you can create a free Infosec Skills account and get access to 130, 140 different completely free courses. And then if you wanted to even try Mark Viglione's courses, you can do a 7-day free trial. So there are lots of opportunities to explore without paying. So be sure to check that out. And with that, I'll wrap up. Just wanted to give a big shout out to Mark for taking the time today. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise. As we wrap up, a very short survey will appear, and we greatly appreciate your thoughts on this webinar or any future webinars. We use those to decide, what we should talk about next. And if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at Infosec or, Mark on LinkedIn. I'm sure he doesn't mind. I didn't ask him, but I'm sure he don't mind. So we'd be happy to answer your questions. Thanks again to everyone, and have a great day.